polluted and we are completely safe inside the boundaries of our homes. But in a study by US EPA, it was observed that level of indoor air pollutants are 2 to 5 times more than outdoor air pollutants. There are many factors responsible for poor indoor air quality and related health issues, but unfortunately, people are not aware of it. In this building capacity program, we have invited panelists and speakers who have extensively worked in this area for years and will share their experiences with us. This event is divided into two parts. On the first day, that is today, we have panel discussion followed by 2 days comprehensive training program. Details of training program will be shared by Dr. Radha Goyal. Panel discussion will start with keynote lecture by Dr. Prasad Modak, and then all the panelists will give their viewpoints on different aspects of indoor air pollution and will share their experiences. This will be followed by question answer session where participants or audiences can ask our panelists if they have any queries related to indoor air pollution. Registration for training is open. Whoever is interested can register today by 12 a.m. Thank you so much. Now I request Dr. Priyanka Kulshresht to introduce our esteemed panelist.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, and it's my absolute honor. Prasad Modak with us, who will be giving us the keynote lecture on indoor air quality management. Dr. Modak doesn't need any kind of introduction. He's a pioneer in the field of environment, and any environmentalist would know about Professor Modak. But still, to give you just a brief inkling into what Professor Modak is about, he's an executive president of Environmental Management Center LLP and director eConnect Knowledge Foundation. He has been the ex-professor at IIT Bombay. He's worked with almost all key UN multilateral and bilateral developmental institutions and intergovernmental organizations in the world, apart from Government of India and various state governments. His advice is sought by governments of Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Mauritius, Thailand, and Vietnam. He's a member of Indian Resource Panel at MOEFCC. He's a member of Task Force on Sustainable Public Procurement at the Ministry of Finance. He has drafted a report on status on resource efficiency and recommendations towards circular economy for Niti Aayog. And he has been a contributor to UNEP's Green Economy Report. He has been a co-author of the Global Waste Management Outlook and chief editor of Asia Waste Management Outlook for United Nations Environment. This is just a gist of what we talk about when we talk about Professor Modak. He has plenty of experience and which he gives us some insight into through his blogs. So it's our absolute honor, sir, to have you here with us to speak on this most relevant topic of indoor air quality management. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Priyanka, for this introduction. And then the outset, let me congratulate Niti and Society for Indoor Activity of training. The opening remarks well that this is a subject that hasn't received as much attention as it deserves. And what I will do today is take you through a few slides. And as I will take you through this presentation, I'll make some commentary, which I'm sure the panel of experts, which is going to speak after I conclude, will delve more. And I'm sure that they will elaborate some of the perspectives that I'll be talking about around indoor air quality. So let me share my screen and just let me know whether the screen is visible. Are you able to see the screen? Priyanka, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, my presentation will center around on the indoor air quality standards But then I will, like to talk more about how do we respond to the need that we have a acceptable indoor air quality, and what kind of policy and programmatic measures can we take so that we are in a position to achieve our goal to have safe air quality both indoors and of course outdoors. So this is a picture which many of you must have seen, which we see today, not for the reason of air quality, but because of the COVID pandemic. We kind of got, isn't it, accustomed to wearing a mask. But besides the COVID pandemic and its threat, there have been already situations that people in Delhi, people in streets of Beijing, Kathmandu, people are got habituated also to use masks so that they can protect from the poor air quality, especially when it comes to particulates, and that too fine particulates like PM 2.5. So the pictures, earlier I used to think it's very gory, but now I'm tending to believe it's becoming closer to reality. And it's not anymore that Delhi is facing problems of outdoor air pollution, but city of Mumbai also is catching up. And you see, this particular year we saw this winter that the air quality in Mumbai was pretty bad, and in some cases even comparable to what we observed in Delhi. Now, the dweller, if you look at it in the building or any built structures, the air quality part becomes so critical, which if not maintained, either due to sources of pollution in the indoor environment or poor air circulation and inefficient air cleaning systems, you tend to see people often complaining of eye or throat irritations, headaches, in some cases even dizziness, feeling of nausea and sickness, and those especially who are prone to asthma can even face difficulty in breathing. There also have been results people have seen where there is a irritation on the skin, and in such an environment it then becomes very difficult for working people to concentrate on their job, and also causes a lot of fatigue. And it's not just the work environment we are talking here, we're talking about also the residential houses, with cinema halls, and you find that in all these enclosed spaces, the indoor air quality is playing a very important role. And people did find when such symptoms were seen and they started diagnosing why those symptoms were found, then it was clear that it is indoor air quality has been pretty much responsible. And the sources being also sometimes so difficult to imagine, like releases of volatile organic compounds, for example, from the materials which are used. That may include wall paints, floor carpets, and this leakage of diffuse leakage of these pollutants, apart from cooking or using a fuel, was also then identified as an important source of indoor air pollution. And when these kinds of problems were getting persistently observed in buildings, then this term came up, what we call as a sick building syndrome, or SBS. And this syndrome was then observed in many places, calling for an attention that something has to be done so that the indoor air quality over a period of time is corrected, is improved, and then such symptoms what people face in the workspace or the living areas, they are addressed. And that very concern brought out the importance of the subject of indoor air quality. And the response typically you would see in any environmental governance is to come up with first setting some goals or acceptable values, and which we call them as regulatory standards, and then these standards could have tiers. Some of them could be primary level standards, and some could be secondary. Some could be even structured as desirable levels of indoor air quality. They may not be strictly regulated, but can serve also as a guidance. And since we are talking about the air quality in indoors, it is important that these standards are also supported by building codes, because the building design, the airflow, becomes a very important parameter or a consideration which can influence the indoor air quality. So unless you have in some sense, these two standard setting process and the building codes resonate, you may not get a good solution to address this problem. So therefore, something very important all of us have to realize, that when we look at ambient air quality standards, we really don't look at the when it comes to indoor air quality. You need to also, as I was saying earlier, we have to look into the building codes. Now, this kind of a transdisciplinary approach, because you have to put on the top of all this the health specialists who are going to investigate the causes of these symptoms, and also regularly monitoring the dosage that populations sitting in the built environment receives, and what are the health implications. The subject then becomes challenging here, because not only that we are going to look at building codes, we have, after I finish on the panel, Richie Mittal, who's in charge of the president of the ISHRE. The whole idea that how do you use air conditioning, because many built structures today are mechanized ventilations, so they have to be brought in. You got to bring in people also who are in the paint industry. We got to talk to people who are in the furniture industry, because you do get releases of VOCs from the sealants which we use, the waxes which are being used in the furniture making, textiles, curtains. They also release or lease out VOCs, and that depends again what kind of finishing processes are being used and what kind of chemicals are used on coating of these fabrics. So the subject then becomes very complex, that we have to bring in all these stakeholders, and therefore I would say standard setting for indoor air quality is much more trickier than talking about setting standards for the outdoor air quality. Since we are talking in this in this address, I want to talk also about some interesting lateral issues, that when we talk about outdoor air quality, even there you have an issue, because we generally talk about ambient air quality. We don't discuss pedestrian exposure air quality. We haven't got a standard for the pedestrian exposure, which is a part of the outdoor air quality, but something very important needs to be looked at and should be considered, especially when we talk about traffic signal planning. Now, that's where we get idling emissions. So the response, if you look at it from the various governments, realizing the importance of indoor air quality, began as early as in the 80s, and 87 was the year where Canada came with IAQ, or indoor air quality guidelines. And they reflected these guidelines in the building codes, what I was talking about. So that's very important to note. It's early beginning. We are talking here more than 30 years ago, such a development took place. And then you find Finland came up with the air quality, indoor air quality standard, again guided by the building code. Singapore was also at the same time, in 1995, they came up with their code of practice, which is applicable for new buildings as well as the existing buildings. Remember that in all these responses, the built structures, their design, the codes are intimately integrated to the expectations on the indoor air quality. 96 was the year where you see Germany, which came up with guidelines, But then these guidelines were applicable not just for residences, offices, and schools. And Poland took a step where they started specifying maximum allowed concentration based guidelines. So they wanted to be surely safe by limiting the maximum allowed concentrations of pollutants indoors. Japan is a case where World Health Organization's guidelines or standards were used as a foundation, and that led to the Japanese air quality, indoor air quality standards. And you find everywhere, I'm not going to take you through every year's milestone, Norway, Hong Kong, and France, United Kingdom, you will find that these guidelines got evolved more so not for enforcing agencies, like in our case, pollution control, for important element that we have to realize what was that genesis, and how you will find everywhere a combination of regulatory standards supported by the building codes was the approach. It's interesting as we move along, and you will see there that China is an interesting case which began addressing the indoor air quality related issues in different stages. So what you see in this diagram is a pictorial perspective of the stages. Stage 1 called as a starting stage, stage 2 as a developing stage, stage 3 is a normative management stage. So this is important, that it just tells you how the standards get evolved, get adapted, the science reaches up to a point in the journey, but then you have to go normative using what we call the principles, which are called precautionary principles of taking decisions. So you have preventive principles or preventative principles, and you have precautionary principle where we realize or we accept that there's a limit to the science and we got to be precautionary. So China's journey began early. We are talking about these 3 stages, and in each stage, which began with identifying the harmful substances and what kind of limits could be set and influence the sources. Remember that when we bring in such standards, right, we are influencing the industry. Let's say a paint manufacturer, if people are made more and more aware that, you know, paints with the high VOC content are harmful to the health of people, that pressure, and the consumers or those who are living citizens demanding or questioning or not buying those surface finishes like paints with high VOC, there is a market risk to the producer. And therefore, these producers will have to modify their manufacturing processes so that they limit the leakage of volatile organic compounds. So any standard setting process in a complex environment of indoors is giving signals not just to the paint manufacturers, even the furniture makers. All these are getting impacted when we come up with the indoor air quality standards. We call this as cascading effects. And if there is no preparedness, and if there is no drive of raising awareness to the community, such a realization is not going to happen. So I may have a standard, but I don't influence the sources of emissions in the indoor environment, then I will always be non-compliant to this standard, right? So that is what we call maturity processes taking place in countries, going through stages. So the developing stage is where we learn a lot how effective these standards are. But it takes a while, 20 years, 30 years, that you reach a normative management stage, where then you understand the phenomena better. In some sense, you can say what these numbers, therefore, each country came up with. They could, in many ways, give us an idea what levels should we be looking at as a goal. And this is an excellent compilation done by the Society for Indoor Environment. And I think I would say this work, I don't recall now whether it's got a wide publicity or a publication, but the hope was that this small dossier reaches maximum people so they understand the subject in little more science and quantitative based terms, like limiting concentrations set as standards by different countries. So here you see numbers in Singapore and in Finland, and in Hong Kong for PM 2.5. So there is a variation. You would see a big difference in the acceptable values in Finland, for example, or Hong Kong, for example, and you know that is important. That if you look at these numbers and you set them as standards, then the question then comes that are they achievable? Remember that when you set a standard, there is a whole cycle that you got to develop a sampling and monitoring protocol. That's important, which is for an environment like indoors really matters, because the atmospheric turbulence indoors is not easy to understand, and therefore the whole process which goes behind the setting the standard is critical, being then that do we set it at 50 micrograms or do we set it at 20 micrograms or 100 micrograms, becomes a very important decision that whether these standards are really achievable. We have to look at therefore the way our building designs are, the kinds of ventilation efficiency that what kind of solid fuels people are using for cooking, all these matter. So definitely in the receptor itself, the population itself has its own specifics of health. It's a cocktail. You have to look at parameters. So it's not that we start with Hong Kong as an example. Why not, somebody will say. But then we do need a better investigation. Therefore, I would say more and more surveys, more and more data gathering, especially when it comes to health, becomes essential. We have to talk about here, you know, campaign-based approach actually, where we study the impact of air quality on health in following cohorts. And that's what I said earlier, as we conduct such studies in the development stage, so that we can be practical, coming up with a normative management stage. So this is example for particulates 2.5. This is for PM10. You'll find more or less situation similar. Kind of come up here for each of these, you know, you'll find similarity between PM10 and the PM 2.5, etc. Then if you come to gases, nitrogen oxides, here's a comparison for, you see on Canada, again, examples of different levels of standards set for the nitrogen dioxide in Hong Kong. The point to make is level standards. It's interesting point here when we look at nitrogen dioxide, you have carbon monoxide. Again, you will find here a huge variation between each countries.
Sir, sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not moving actually.
Yes, please.
Sir, your slides are not moving.
Oh, I'm really sorry.
I should reshare. 5 only.
Yeah, I'm stopping and resharing.
Sure.
Oh, is it?
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to reshare. I'm going to reshare, okay? Are you able to see this slide now?
Not yet, sir.
Is it working? You can see?
No, sir, we cannot see the slide. Now, yes. Slide number 5.
All right. So this is slide 4, which I think you could see.
Yeah, we
and 5
could follow
onwards
4
you
and
could
5.
Right. So 5, slide number 5, in fact, is what I was talking about. This is PM 2.5 standards in different countries. Just to same point that it's really varying by country to country, and even in a country. Now I'm on slide 7. That nitrogen or dioxide is looked at in Hong Kong at 3 different levels. So that's a point to make, that even for a country, for a pollutant, the indoor quality standards could be different, and classification like good and excellent, etc., are done by those respective governments, in this case, Hong Kong. Moving on to slide 8, it is here a distribution of standards for carbon monoxide. You will find a similar situation of a fair amount of variations between the countries in setting up the standards in micrograms cubic meter for carbon monoxide. Now, if you look at the situation in our country, we responded to the concerns on air pollution way back in 1980. We all Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. And then the first series of standards came up in 1988. They were all for ambient air quality. They got updated majorly so in 2009. And the whole effort was they were getting aligned to the international ambient air quality standards. But today, we still don't have an indoor air quality standard. So while we responded pretty all right when it comes to ambient air quality, the kind of progression I was showing you as early as in 70s, means 40, 50 years ago. The whole journey of, as I said, the phase of starting and developing and getting into normative decision, nothing of that sort has taken place in our country, which is indeed a pity. So much so that if you look at the National Clean Air Plan program, which is announced last year, and then Ministry of Environment and Forest is implemented through the technical help of Central Pollution Control Board, and have been making air quality action plans. You don't see any trace of discussions there happening on the indoor air quality, and that's something very, very discouraging, that we haven't really mainstream or even attended to the need to look at indoor air quality. If you look at the whole objective of NCAP is to actually improve the health or protect the health of people. And like you said in the opening remarks, health is better understood when you look at both indoor and outdoor, but I would say more indoors. And if that is not in the tracking system of the program, then how do we justify the investments, what we are making under NCAP, are actually going to help in protecting the health of people? So that's why, as I said in my opening remarks, that I'm very happy that NEERI and SI have come together to offer such a kind of a program. Certainly, we require a strategic approach. You can't expect a pollution control board officer, even if you had set up the indoor air quality standard, to walk into a cinema hall or a large commercial complex with a handheld air quality monitor and checking the compliance with the standard. So that's something not going to be practical. When such situations arise that you can't really do a conventional enforcing, you might like to do surveys, quick inspections through research organizations, long-term studies, but you definitely need a strategic approach to reach to the objective of the standards if we have set them. And like you saw in the history, as I said, not only indoor air quality standards got developed, but their linkages to the building codes and the guidelines were looked at the same time. So if you look into this slide, you will see a box on standards and codes and guidelines where all those standards which are put forth by different countries codes by professional bodies and associations, and the guidelines, several guidelines which have been prepared under green building rating schemes, all of these will have to be looked at in the whole thing as a capsule to come up with a, as I said, a normative approach. And that this should be the best practice. This should be the way the codes have to be followed in the interest that the indoor air quality is properly addressed. The options which for an indoor air quality manager has, this I'm talking about an example of a commercial complex, a commercial building, is look at the engineering controls, ventilation, for example, which helps in flushing out the pollutants or circulating and getting the dilution. Controlling it by elimination, like filtration, and more advanced techniques than just the physical separation. Several adsorption-based systems and disinfecting systems. While that is on the control side, and guidelines are responsible for mainstreaming indoor air quality, we continuously have to focus on source modifications. And therefore, low VOC emitting household products, low VOC buildings themselves. And I don't know whether we have today Professor Mukesh Khare, but there's a very interesting project for 3 or 4 years, I don't remember the number of years now, which was launched with a number of universities in Europe, and materials and the leakages of VOCs. And this takes us to interior design materials. I see today, I think you said Professor Roshni is also here. I'm sure about some of these, but also to the areas where we talk about building materials, interior designs, etc. Like the LEED 4 standard, which we have now, is specifically on interior design. And not that I'm saying that every built structure has to be LEED 4 certified, but the elements of LEED 4 could be utilized, and they may be woven into our building codes. And the same thing I would say when we have such codes coming from ISHRAE and so on and so forth. So the indoor air quality gets addressed now through different 3 important perspectives: the codes, guidelines, and standards, engineering control measures, and source modifications. When we follow these 3 together, then only we may be optimistic that we will achieve the targets. Now, practical feasibility. Yeah.
The slides are stuck again. We are on slide 9.
Oh, you don't see 10 now?
No, not now also.
No, keep alerting me, because otherwise I will assume that you are watching. So let me reshare again.
Please, thank you.
Okay, I'm resharing now. I won't take much time, don't worry. So I'll like to stop in time. Resharing again now?
Yeah, I cannot see anything yet.
No, I'm doing it now. So you should see. Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are on slide 10, correct.
Yeah, I must stay on this slide a bit so that this is important, and just giving you what I was speaking about, that you got to have this 3-pronged strategy of codes and controls and addressing the emission source itself. And to achieve, honestly, all these 3 is a huge ripple factor in terms of professionals, they getting trained, material manufacturers, and the air pollution control technology specialists who can exercise the engineering control. So dealing with indoor air quality and its management is not easy. It really requires a good synergy between all these 3. So building codes is one example, rating schemes. So I'm going to go a little quickly. You have organizations like the Indian Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, the ISHRAE, and the International ASHRAE. LEED, I was already talking about LEED 4 particularly now, and all that together makes a sense to influence indoor air quality. Just to take you a little bit ahead and stop, is that the understanding, when it got focused on the safety and the comfort, even looking at thermal stresses that the people living in the built environment were facing, the air quality was expanded to cover all such different variables. And then the subject came as indoor environmental quality, or IEQ. And there a lot of other features, like I mentioned just now, like a thermal stress, etc., started getting addressed. So it became a broader definition, where indoor air quality was becoming one component: thermal comfort, lighting and its quality, acoustics, even the ergonomics, the furniture, space layout, all that got into this expanded definition of IEQ, or indoor environmental quality. And that's something where IAQ contributes. Priyanka, I thought I will stop here because I have too many slides and I don't want to drag on further, because some of these I'm just highlighting are topics I'm sure each of our panelists will to follow. I mean, I see Professor Arun Sharma there. He will take health perspective quite in detail, and I don't want to therefore go through each of these slides. I am going to be therefore stopping with this last slide.
Sure, sir. Sure.
The subject, you have multiple stakeholders. Can you see, Priyanka, this slide?
Yes, sir.
Is it visible, this slide? All right. So multi-agency coordination is required. You do need such an agency to be set up, which will bring together different ministries and come and do some prescriptions. And these prescriptions will have to be taken through the channels of each of the ministries so that they get implemented, all in synergy to get the desired effect of protecting ourselves from the indoor air quality. And, how shall I say, maybe more than 10 years, I have been lobbying with the government with no response, no action. That's something which is always worrying me, and all of you here and very senior people from this subject, I don't know, maybe just like the farmers will have to sit one day outside the MOEF. I'll stop at this point.
Thank you, Professor Modak. Sir, it was such an enlightening presentation, and I'm so sure that we all have learned from it in our own possible ways. And you have set the right kind of platform to take it forward to the panel discussion. I would really request you, till whatever time you can give it to us, if you can be with us and contribute to the panel discussion also. Thank you so much, sir. And
thank you.
I request, I am proud and honored to welcome all our distinguished panelists who have been very eagerly waiting and very patiently waiting for a slight kind of delay, but that's what we expect from some online options that we have. So a very good afternoon to all the distinguished panelists, organizing committee members, and the august audience. It's our privilege to welcome you to this national workshop and training program on building capacity for quality management, being organized by CSIR and Society for Indoor Environment. It's our privilege and honor today that we have with us the experts who are rich in knowledge and experience and who are there to share with us their knowledge and experience at this forum. We thank Dr. Modak for setting up this right platform for this constructive discussion with this pragmatic panel, which we have gathered here today for. And this workshop and training program has translated our vision into reality and given form and shape to an idea for which the organizing committee has worked relentlessly with passion and attained their vision. Before moving forward, I would like to thank our committee members for the faith, hard work, and motivation with which they defied all odds and made this event possible. Thank you to all the committee members. It's my privilege to welcome all the students who have joined us on this forum. And just a small saying that I remember, dreams are not what you see while sleeping. Dreams are the ones that don't let you sleep. So with this positive note, I thank all the participation that we have, starting from Warangal, Mumbai, Shahdol, Kollam, Agra, Gurgaon, Firozabad, Varanasi, to just name a few. Without any further delay, it's my honor to welcome our star experts on indoor air quality management panel discussion. We have with us Engineer B. Padma S. Rao. She is a senior principal scientist and head of the Legal and Environmental Policy Division, CSIR NEDI. She is also a professor in CSIR Academy, New Delhi. She has a vast experience of 31 years in the area of air quality management and control. She has, to her credit, more than 200 research and consultancy projects, 20 research publications in international journals, and also the fellow of Rockefeller Foundation Lead UK. It's our pleasure to welcome you, ma'am. Can we have you with your cameras on so that our audience is able to get a glimpse of you?
Just a minute. Am I visible?
Yes, ma'am. It's our pleasure to have you here.
Hello.
Next, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Arun Kumar Sharma, Professor in Department of Community Medicine. Professor Sharma is a multifaceted personality with an MBA, and he's also a guest faculty at Faculty of Management Studies. Occupational health consultant to Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, and has been awarded several fellowships. To name some is the
Dr. Priyanka, request you to stop at that and move forward, please.
Sir, it is. I think the participants need to know. I know it, but the participants do surely need to know. So he has a lot of fellowships and a lot of experience in the field of public health. He has more than 60 research publications, and why I know him well is he's the president of Society for Indoor Environment. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Richie Mittal. Mr. Mittal is the director of Overdrive Engineering Private Limited. How we know him here is he's the national president of ISHRE, Indian Society for Heating, Refrigerating and Air Conditioning Engineers. He's the board of director of Indoor Air Quality Association USA. He owns many hats, some of them being the regional member council representative of region at large at ASHRAE, founder member, International Ground Source Heat Pump Association USA, to name a few. He has a vast experience of 36 years in the industry, and he is also into academics as guest lecturer in many engineering colleges. We welcome. Can we have you, sir?
Thank you,
can the participants?
So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, right, sir. Next, we have with us Mr. Partha Bosu. Mr. Bosu leads the air quality work for Environmental Defense Fund in India. He's also their lead India advisor. He's an expert in air quality management with more than 18 years of experience working in multi-sectorial environment. Has worked with the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, where he was part of the team that developed the computerized emission check system for vehicles in India and designed and implemented training and various state pollution control with various state pollution control boards. We welcome you, sir. I'll request you to just please switch on your cameras. Thank you. We welcome you to the forum. We last but never the least, to bring more diversity to the panel discussion, we have Dr. Roshni Yehuda, who's a practicing architect and academician whose core competency lies in energy efficient and environmental design of buildings, something which is of prime importance when we talk about indoor air quality. Dr. Rashmi is a qualified master trainer and impaneled expert on Energy Conservation Building Code of India, awarded by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Dr. Yehuda also dons a lot of hats in terms of her work in architecture as president Institute of Environmental Architecture and Research, Mumbai, co-chairman ASSOCHAM GEM, Maharashtra chapter. She's also the director for Roshni Udyawar and Associates, Mumbai. She has more than 20 years of academic and professional experience. It's a pleasure to have you, ma'am, and will surely bring your presence will surely bring more to this forum. Now, we start with the panel discussion for what we have been waiting for. My first question is with regards to buildings only from Dr. Roshni. Ma'am, how does the building design and building material play an important role in managing indoor air quality in the old buildings and the newly constructed buildings? What is your view on that in terms of indoor air quality?
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka, and thank you, Niri, for inviting me. This is a very important question. I think the design of a building plays a very important role in the indoor air quality, in the indoor environment quality as well, as Dr. Modak pointed out, as we spend most of the time indoors. So there are two important aspects that I would like to point out. Of course, the whole sick building syndrome and all that is something we know about. The two things that are really important are daylighting and natural ventilation, which we associate with something called as thermal comfort, also visual comfort. So these are generally not taken into consideration in indoor air quality as well as in building design. Lately, it has been ignored, but it is a very, very important aspect. So I think that in existing buildings, there is a bigger challenge, but in new buildings, definitely daylighting can be made available by providing daylighting windows, which are at higher height, providing the right kind of orientation, providing light shelves, which allow the movement of daylight much inside the building, or by even using technology such as daylighting pipes. So the two important things here is that we are able to get the right quantity of light as well as the right quality of light, because in many of the IT offices, for example, they are all having these glass facades, and generally people who sit at the windows, they get intense amount of light and the glare, and the people who sit much inside have always got to use natural artificial light. And there is a lot of research which points out that lighting is important not only from the perspective of the functional requirements, but also from the perspective of the circadian rhythms, the biological clock, and how we feel mentally. So this one thing has been ignored, and therefore I thought that I should point this out first. There's a whole concept now called human-centric lighting, which has been introduced, which includes the concept of providing adequate daylight, good quality of daylight, as well as lighting which is of less glare, and uniformity ratio is maintained, and so on. The second thing is about natural ventilation. So natural ventilation is that you provide enough amount of air changes. For example, in our country, I think for residential buildings, we allow for 3 air changes, which is very big a number as compared to some of the other countries where ventilation is considered as a sort of infiltration, and ventilation is generally provided through mechanized sources. So, in that sense, we generally have a larger number of buildings which are, naturally ventilated. And in all of these cases, we don't have the issues. But where the issues come is where people do something to their windows, or they modify their windows, or they change it, and over a period of time, and therefore the ventilation rates decrease, or people just close them because of noise, and dust also is a factor. So these are important aspects. And of course, lastly, the aspect of building materials. I think Dr. Modak dwelt a little bit on that. Materials which we use indoors, for example, especially plywood that is used for interior design, which is very, very common. Now there are plywood, which is, they use resins of urea formaldehyde is generally used in plywoods. Now, therefore, this releases a lot of formaldehyde over its lifetime. Its half-life is quite long, and therefore it causes a lot of issues if there is not enough ventilation in the places. So it is always advisable to flush out the houses for a few days at least, or a few weeks, if you can, after the house is completed with its interiors and so on. So materials like even MDF with its particulate matters, or the carpets and the surfaces that we use inside for the sofas and so on. Also nowadays there is a trend for using carpet tiles. We found in one of our studies that the maximum amount of VOCs in open offices are because of these carpet tiles, because they leave out a lot of emissions, and in most of the offices where there is not enough air changes for various reasons, this has found to affect the health of the people as well. So I think these are some of the important things. And I would just like to add one more aspect which we generally completely ignore is the kind of materials with respect to toxicity, fire toxicity. You must have heard of the Grenfell Tower incident in 2017. And the two things that were interesting in its findings was that there was recently a refurbishment done, and in the refurbishment, the facade was made using the aluminum composite panels. And one of the things that it does is that there's a resin used to bond the 5 or 6 layers, and that led to the rapid movement of the fire because it melted with high temperature, and then it spread the fire very rapidly. And also the emissions that were related to it. The second thing was the insulation, which fortunately I would say is much less prevalent in India. But the foam insulation that was used caused a lot of emissions of acetonitrile and things like that, and therefore a lot of people were affected by and died of asphyxiation in those buildings. So while constructing buildings, whether it is new buildings or when you're making modifications to old buildings, the materials that we use with respect to all of these parameters, I think should be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, Dr. Roshni, I totally agree with you on this point. And these are very, very good examples that you have quoted. Though in India, we are moving, but one area which really intrigues me is that we are moving towards energy efficiency, wherein we say that indoor air quality is also an important part to it. That's like walking on a tightrope. So how do you think should we balance this mixture of energy efficiency and maintenance of good indoor air quality, especially in urban built environment?
I would say, yes, you're absolutely right. Indoor environment quality and energy efficiency are closely related, but we can tackle each of them independently and without affecting the other. How we could do this is that we focus a lot on passive design, on making building envelopes in a way that they reduce the overall heat gain coefficient and the overall cooling load. So if this is done, this can be done by, for example, providing the right kind of shading devices, providing the right U value or transmission value for heat transmission value for the roof or the opaque wall assembly. I mean, we have standards like the Energy Conservation Building Code, which says that your building envelope value should be, opaque wall should be about 0.44. Today, we have very few materials which reach to that. But then if we do all of these things, providing the right kind of transmission value and shading and all the passive measures, including proper ventilation, and ventilation using buoyancy is a very, very a useful way of providing ventilation, which we were using in our traditional architecture a lot, like solar chimneys courtyards and things like that, or even central courts that we used in that we use today in buildings can be used for this purpose. So if all of these things are done, then the question of clash with the indoor air quality does not arise, because we are providing all of the natural the air changes that are required, and we are still using a good envelope. So designing of the envelope in a proper way is the first step to doing this. And then you can have other things like, one of the research of ours showed that using plants can definitely reduce the indoor the emissions of VOCs in an indoor situation. So we advise in a lot of buildings now, campuses, school campuses, we do these audits, and we tell them to introduce indoor plants, especially in the administrative areas where people spend a lot of time indoors. In the classrooms, etc., people are constantly moving. But in these areas, we definitely advise people that you have plants, and even if you don't have proper, even if you have a closed and sealed building, at least flush the building twice a day, so that you in the morning before you enter, and in the evening you can shut off the you can open out all the windows and allow all the emissions inside to be released. And of course the lighting, as I said, providing sunlight indoors is very important. In many buildings we have found that fungi and spores, especially in warm and humid climate like Mumbai, they develop, and then that causes lots of problems to the inhabitants. We have seen people suffering from lung issues and so on. It's mainly because there's not enough sunlight reaching into places in warm humid climates, and then people are drying clothes indoors and so on. So there are lots of things, but I think that from your question, I think that we can easily separate the two, provide highly energy efficient B star rated equipment and make the building energy efficient from the active energy point of view, and from the passive energy, provide a passively designed, highly efficient building as well, and then provide all of these measures for providing a good indoor air quality, like plants and not using the wrong kind of materials inside, flushing the house, and so on and so forth.
Yes, Dr. Roshni, I totally agree with you. And looking at your vast experience and the way you design the courses, I would really, that's just a suggestion. If you could just put up something related to energy efficiency and indoor air quality, it would surely be a good course that our students and the faculty or academia, industry people too, would be willing to take over. Thank you, Dr. Roshni. Thanks a lot. And you rightly talked about the health aspect to the panel discussion. We take the next question to Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma, with the present state, when we were working on indoor air quality, the next area that we looked forward to was monitoring of bioaerosols. I remember working on a project wherein that is an area which we look forward to. And with pandemic coming up and taking over in terms of the virus invasion, what do you think are the research initiatives that that should hold priority in the time to come in terms of indoor air quality? Dr. Sharma?
Question, and also thank you for having me. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes. Sure, sir.
Okay, so I thank you once again for inviting me to this panel and asking this very important question about bioaerosols. So as I understand, you may say I am an outsider in environmental engineering or environmental sciences research. Being from the narrative has been around either the volatile organic compounds or the particulate matter, or as Roshni was talking about, the energy efficiency and ventilation and issues like that. So in the entire paradigm, the bioaerosol component has been conspicuously absent from most of the discourses here. Now, why it is important and why it is relevant, I would like to start by saying that broadly, the diseases that human beings suffer from are classified as infectious diseases and non-infectious diseases. Among the infectious diseases, with all those diseases which are caused by microorganisms, the bacteria, the virus, the fungi, and parasites and other organisms, which are microscopic in size, or for that matter, virus is even smaller than being a microscopic object or a living thing, which can't be seen even with a simple microscope. It requires to be seen through an electron microscope. So these particles, these invisible particles, create havoc with the life of human beings. You talked in context of COVID-19 pandemic. There's an interesting anecdote that hardly there is 1.3 grams of COVID-19 virus, which is present on the entire planet. And this grams of virus has created such havoc to the entire human race. So you can understand its importance. Now, coming to a serious issue, all these particles, the living particles, that is the bacteria, virus, or fungi, are present in our atmosphere, primarily in the air, or it may be in the water or soil. There is no other fourth source. And these three sources, these organisms, and whether we take it through the respiratory route when we inhale it, or we take it to the GI route, through the food pipe, and we ingest it, or it may be directly affecting our skin, and it can be causing myriad types of diseases. Now, they can cause COVID, they can cause pneumonia, they can cause gastroenteritis, they can cause simple boils and furuncles on the skin, or they can cause fungal itching infection on any part of the skin. So such a large number of diseases which are inadvertently present in our living environment, more so in the indoor environment. And there are different environmental scenarios where these organisms get an opportunity to grow, multiply, and therefore available to affect the human beings. Therefore, in indoor environment management, to air quality issues, the biological components must be essentially included, and to ensure that the healthy indoor environment will be that which is devoid of all these disease-causing organisms. How to do that? Now, how to do that? There are two parameters. Number one, these particles use the existing PM 2.5, PM1, and PM10, the suspended particulate matter, as a vehicle. They ride on these, like one 2.5 micron PM 2.5 micron particle can carry hundreds of COVID-19 virus on it, or for that matter, any virus, because the size of the virus is something around 0.13 micron, right? So that means one single particle of PM 2.5 is good enough to carry hundreds of the particles of the virus, or maybe tens of particles of the bacteria. And the problem is that even this small dose of the bacteria or virus once enters into our body, being a living being, it has an ability to multiply into thousands and then millions and cause the disease. So the prevention aspect that is required to be covered, that any amount of the virus or bacteria should be prevented from entering the body. Therefore, we have to be very thorough and meticulous in keeping our indoor environment clean, to the extent ensuring that these organisms do not gain access to our body. How do we do that? Besides eliminating or reducing the concentration of these vehicle particles, there are other environmental factors like the temperature, humidity, presence of oxygen and carbon dioxide. These are the four parameters which, like every other human being, these bacteria and virus also require. So we know that if the temperatures become extremely cold in a room, then that becomes a very good protection ground for the organisms, because these organisms survive better and get into hibernation when you put them in cold temperature conditions. So having an air conditioner working at 18 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Celsius in a room is not actually maybe giving a comfort to the skin, but it is giving equal comfort to the bacteria and the virus, who are very happily residing in that environment when the temperature is 18 or 20. But if we keep that temperature between 28 and 30, which is also equally comfortable for human being, will put the organisms at a disadvantage. So we have to find an optimum temperature at which we discourage the growth of these organisms in our environment. Okay, that's an important consideration we have to see. Second aspect is the humidity. The humidity is a very important factor. People who live in Mumbai and other coastal areas will know that the moisture levels in the air are very high in the coastal area. And these moistures increase the risk of growth of fungi in the respective bathrooms, in the living rooms, and also like the wood furniture that we have in the home, the wood furniture that we have in the home in excess moisture conditions. All these are pertinent to increasing the diseases like bronchial asthma on one side. Or even some fungi which are present in say sugarcane or other things, and even in the air conditioner. If the air conditioners are not properly cleaned regularly, then there is a fungal organism called Thermophilus actinomycetes, which grows in the ducts of the air conditioner. And if you start using that air conditioner in a moist environment without cleaning it properly, that increases the risk of this fungus being transmitted into human beings and cause diseases of the respiratory system. What I am trying to tell you is not to scare the listeners and our participants here, but to make you aware that these microorganisms are very important component of our indoor environment, which are responsible for causing several diseases. So, when we are developing our indoor air quality standards, when we have to keep in mind that such isolation or removal of such organism using the suitable detergent or spray or suitable cleaning method is very important. That suppose in a dry area we do the brooming. While brooming, we are actually resuspending the particles which have been lying on the floor or on the surface for quite some time. And those particles may be fully loaded with bacteria, virus and all that. And in our minds, those particles in the air and thereby making inhalation. So is it really a good? That becomes questionable. We don't have, direct research is conducted on this particular aspect in Indian scenario. But we do need to look into that. We need to gather that dust, see how much organisms are there in it and whether they are directly responsible for causing the disease. Of course, anecdotal and clinical experiences are there that people who suffer from bronchial asthma, they do report that when they do brooming or cleaning or dusting, after they have an acute attack of that. Or some people say that we went into a old house and we tried to do cleaning and all, and after that we developed skin infections. So there are many such conditions when we are not aware and we are exposed to these organisms. And these organisms are essentially the bioaerosols. So we need to look at the existence, we have to be aware of the existence of these bioaerosols, and we have to take appropriate measures and actions to ensure that they are not harmful to the human. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. And this is just a trailer. Professor Sharma will also be giving us a deep insight into this lecture of what he has just told us about. And as Professor Modak also said, these all are, health is a primary aspect when we talk about indoor air quality management, because eventually it needs to be managed to be taken care of from the health perspective. And I'll pick up from where Professor Sharma left, and he has talked about these bioaerosols being part of the air conditioning units and in urban built environment. That is something of prime importance. So moving on, taking this air conditioning thing to Mr. Rishi Mittal, who's the president of ISHRAE. Sir, how do you think that industry, at least in urban built environment, it is the air conditioners which are being used, and if they become the source of a problem, how do you think we can cope up because of air pollution, indoor air quality under the NCAP? Your views on that, sir?
Thank you, Priyanka. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, totally.
Like, thank you. I'll take a liberty to explain everybody what is ISHRAE. You very nicely said, use the word ISHRAE. So ISHRAE is the Indian Society of Heating, Refrigerating, Air Conditioning Engineers, which has around 45 chapters, sub-chapters spread all over India. We have 30,000 plus members and student members. And our vision and mission is to disseminate knowledge. So this is a quick brief about ISHRAE, and presently I'm the president of the society. So with this, on your question, first of all, I would like to say that, ISHRAE is very cautious on this air quality issue from quite quite a bit amount of time. And in fact, we developed a indoor environmental quality standard, which was one of the first standard being developed by any organization, I would say. We call it a IEQ standard. 2001, 2016, it was launched.